They let me play with power tools this week. These are pretty amazing contraptions, these power drills. I'm old enough to remember the dark ages where you used to have a cord that went off of this and had to plug into a wall. And if you've ever done any kind of construction with that situation, you know it's a pain because you're constantly rearranging the cords and stepping on them. And if it's a saw, often cutting them. So whoever came up with this idea of putting a battery on the end of a drill so that you didn't need cords anymore was a genius. But they didn't think it through because they forgot to think about the fact that who would be operating this is a human being. And we don't always think ahead. There's a few ways to use a power drill, whether it's a big battery one like this or a small little battery Black & Decker one that you keep in your kitchen drawer. Way number one is to just always keep it on. You could get a lot done doing this, right? It might be hard to hit the screw your first couple tries, but eventually you just zip, 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 zip. You could keep going nonstop forever and ever, until the battery runs out. And then you're stuck. You're stuck for a long time. And that's a frustrating moment if you've ever been the person, because it usually dies when you're just about done. And now you got to wait a couple hours for the battery to charge back up so that you can finish the job that you started, and we're close to finishing. Constantly on doesn't really work. It drains the battery faster, and when it's drained, it's dead, and you're toast. The other way to do it would be to use it for a while, but then just shut it off before the battery dies. We're not going to let it get that low. We're just going to put it to the side, leave it alone, and kind of go, isn't that an awesome drill over there? The good news is you're not fried, right? The battery's not fried, but you are frustrated because the job that you set out to do is not going to get done the longer that sits over there doing nothing. You know, and I know, that the way a battery-operated drill works best is to use it for a while, and before it burns out, plug it into the charger. Take the battery off, plug it into the charger. It doesn't take quite as long to charge. You can put the battery back on and use the drill again. And if you do it in that way, if you use that kind of rhythm or cadence, your drill will work forever. It won't sit on the shelf doing nothing, and it won't burn out and use up all the juice. You're like, wow, I got up in the morning to come hear that. I already knew all that. You're the drill. And most of you think the best way to do life is always on. Go, 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 go. Work harder, fit more into the day. Don't stop, because if I stop, I'll never get going again. It's best to just keep moving 100 miles an hour, hair on fire. But if you have done this long enough, you know what this feels like. When you're pulling the trigger and there's nothing left. A lot of us have experienced burnout. Whether it's through work or just being a stay-at-home parent where you've hit the wall with that child by the end of the afternoon. If you've ever been in school, study, survive finals, have nothing left in the tank. And if you've ever experienced that, you may have gone, well, that's it, I'm not doing this anymore. And you just kind of gave up. You're like, I'm not putting any effort into life. And again, you may not be fried, but you are frustrated. Because there's something in each of us, no matter what your name is or where you grew up, that wants to do something with our life. We want to make something of ourselves. We want to figure it out and get to the end of a day or a week or a month or a season in life and go, look what I accomplished. Look what I made. So the sitting and doing nothing doesn't really work for very long. We have to find a way to have a little rhythm where we work and we rest. We work and we charge. so that we can keep going further, faster. That's really how it works. Constantly on will take you a long way before the battery wears out. You will accomplish a lot of things on that journey. But at the end of the journey, it's over. You are spent. And you might go for a little while and decide, that's it, I'm not going any further because I don't want to risk it. But you will leave so much on the table. So much that you could have accomplished and that would have fulfilled you and made you feel really good about what you're doing with your life. The best way to navigate this is I go for a while, I break for a minute. I go for a while, I break for a minute. I go for a while, I break for a minute. So here's the good news. You didn't just come to church to hear about how drills and batteries on said drills work. You also came and are going to be encouraged to take a day off, to take a vacation. Not because you're a bad, lazy person, but because that's how God made you. Here's the deal. When you go to buy one of those drills, the features listed is not battery needs to be charged. That's not a selling point on a drill. It's understood that it's part of having one. It can do all of these other things as long as you regularly charge it. Kind of like the oil in your car. The engine will last for a very long time as long as you do regular maintenance. And for you and for me, we tend to think of vacation or a day off as this luxury feature of certain people's lives, but not everybody's lives. We've been waiting a long time to take a day off. We're going to take the vacation someday. We're going to turn the phone off and relax for a few hours when we're retired. That's what retirement is for. But you're going to wait a long time because you're missing an understanding of who God wired you up to be and how he made us operate. And what's so cool about the way he made us to operate is that it was in his image, meaning to operate like he operates. And the God of the universe, the one who made all of this and figured out how all of this would work, took a break quite regularly, actually. And when Jesus would walk around on earth, he took breaks all of the time. My favorite truck to get behind at the school pickup line is the one that says, Jesus took naps. That's why I do. I thought that's so good because Jesus did take naps. Jesus did take breaks. This was part of his rhythm in life, his cadence in life, and it should be part of ours. This is why God came up with the idea of Sabbath. If you've been around church for any amount of time, you've heard that word, and you're always like, I think that just means Sunday. It's probably like Hebrew for Sunday. It's not. If you haven't been around church much, you've probably heard of that, especially if you have any friends that are Jewish, because they observe it quite with a lot of like vim and vigor. Like this is a big deal, and it should be for us too as Jesus followers. The idea of Sabbath, though, is not just a day off. It's a day for. It's not just a retreat. It's an act of worship. It's bigger and it's better. And I understand some of us are here today and we're like, can we just stick with the day off bit because that is what I get. I'm not ready to start late. This will work for you too. Just translate. I'll use the word Sabbath. You use the word day off. But for me, what I've come to understand is I've grappled with my own busyness and my own frantic pace and my own lack of taking a break, is that Sabbath is not the retreat from. It's really rest for you, for him. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go. But the idea is not just I get to take a break. It's I'm taking a break for God in some way. And that this is interwoven together. It's not as simple as just it's the weekend, right? We're all working for the weekend, but there's more to it for those of us that follow Jesus. And I think for those of you that don't, one, I'm super glad that you are here because I think what you're about to hear today might be different than the God that you've heard about in other places. Because the God that I wake up and say good morning to every day is the same God that said, take a day off, rest, recover, charge. In fact, he did it at the very beginning of the whole thing. It was part of creation. And I know that when we read creation, we all read it a little bit differently. Some of us read it as like this literal thing, and the rest of us, a lot of us read it as more of a figurative thing. And the point of the whole thing is not necessarily how God made it, it's that God made it. But what's so interesting is that at the end, on the seventh day of creation, there was no creation. And what's so interesting is with the narrative, the 6 days of creation before, they always ended in the same way. There was morning, there was night, the first day. There was morning, there was night, the second day. Morning, night, third, so on and so forth. But when you get to the seventh day and the idea of Sabbath is introduced for the first time, there's no morning, night, seventh day. It's open-ended, which clues us into what it's really all about. This is what we read back at the beginning. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. It was done. The work was finished. God had looked over the whole thing that he had made, and he said, this is a good deal. Time for a break. And he took a day off. And this is the first time that a word that's usually just reserved for Jewish folks, they use it a lot. I think we should use it too because it's so important. And I'm not big on like throwing a bunch of Hebrew and Greek words at you on a Sunday morning. I think a lot of people do it just to sound smart. I know I'm not smart, and I don't know how to pronounce most of them. But there's a few today that I want to show you because to me they're so full of meaning, and we don't really have English words that get to it. But it's in this seventh day, that moment where all the work was completed, is the first time we start to hear the idea of shalom. Shalom is, for most of us, we think peace. And that is a big part of what shalom is, but shalom is also wholeness or completedness. So when God gets done with everything, the idea is there was shalom, there was peace, it was complete, no broken pieces, no missing pieces. It was just right. I'm convinced that you and I, and every generation that has come before us, has been chasing shalom ever since. We've been chasing peace and we've been chasing wholeness and completedness. This is what drives us to be so busy. We got to get the raise, we got to save the money, we got to go on the vacation, we got to build the house, we got to have the right food, we got to post the right thing on social media, right? All of these things that come up that make us us. At the core of it, last week we talked about what if it's this pursuit of God's adoration and affection. In that is if we were to receive that, we would feel whole. We would feel okay. We would feel like nothing was missing. But a lot of us, at least those of us like me, spend a lot of time feeling like I gotta get just one more thing. I gotta do just one more thing. And then it'll be complete and I can take the break. But what we start to see early on is that the break is part of the complete. That the rest is part of the process. And that we shouldn't detach it and make it this other thing. We should keep it as part of the overall picture. So God kind of does it first, and then a little bit later when he's giving the Israelites the rules of engagement for him. Like, this is how we can have a good relationship with one another, and you can have a good relationship with each other. He kind of institutionalizes the idea of this rest day, this completedness day or shalom day, and we see it in the 10 Commandments, right? And when you read or hear the idea of 10 Commandments, you might get a little bit uneasy because that feels really old school. But trust me, you're going to see this not only here, but into the New Testament with Jesus as well. This is what we read in Exodus. God says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. Here's what's interesting about what God has just said. He didn't just say, remember the Sabbath and take a day off. He said, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. And the idea behind holiness is it's set apart. It belongs to God. It's more important than run-of-the-mill kind of stuff. And he says that that day should be a day dedicated to God. And if you're like me, you're going, well, wait a minute. You can't do nothing and it be dedicated to God. You got to accomplish something for him, right? You got to be kingdom-minded and do kingdom things and volunteer more and give more and do more. That's what it means to be dedicated to God, right? Well, God would say, no, I want you to take a whole day where you don't do your ordinary work and dedicate that to me. The idea being it's not just shut off. It's not just mindlessly watch TikTok or Netflix for 12 waking hours. It's a with me thing. Because when you charge the battery, you are connecting it to something else that is a power source that empowers that thing to then go do what it needs to do. And I'm convinced that God says part of Sabbath is connecting with me so that you have the energy and the power and the creativity and the stamina to go into the next chapter. Because here's the thing, God did not just quit on the seventh day. He didn't just go like, okay, and now I don't have to be God anymore. He kept up the job. He just took one day to not do that anymore. I remember when I was on another staff at a church, we did a spiritual retreat day. And sometimes church staffs do spiritual retreat days so that they can say they did spiritual retreat days, and like then people that go to their church feel like, oh, they're really spiritual. We did that, and I think we should. I'm not totally saying we shouldn't do things like that, but we did this, and I was working with students at the time, so, hopped up on Red Bull and no sleep. And at one point, our boss said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to break away for 2 hours, and that is your time to have Sabbath, to reconnect with God and rest and experience peace. And so here's some ideas. Read these chapters, journal a little bit, pray, be quiet, don't talk, and be alone. Yeah, I slept through the whole thing. I mean, I took the best nap of my life that day. And it wasn't on purpose. I had every intention of doing the things that had been assigned to me, but I was just so tired, I fell asleep. And I remember walking back, because we were coming back to then talk about what we experienced, which felt a little strange to me, but we were coming back and we're going to have this conversation. Everybody's like, oh, I this, and I experienced this, and, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, I am not that spiritual. What am I going to say? And I decided I couldn't lie. So I said, I'm just going to shoot straight. I fell asleep. And I slept the whole time. Like a bum on a park bench, literally. Like I was on a bench just asleep. And I will never forget the response. That was a great couple hours of worship, wasn't it? And I'm like, it was? Yeah. But it was the first time I started to understand what Sabbath really was. That me taking a rest could actually be considered an act of worship. Because it was mind-boggling to me that worship didn't require music, right? We always think those two are the same. And music can be used to worship, but so can be taking a rest. Because that's what God said we should do, and that's what God did himself. And so he uses this word in English, it says observe. The Jewish word here is shamar, which means to keep or heed. And in that definition is you have to decide. Because the vacation's not going to take itself. I don't know if you know this, but your boss is never going to come up to you and be like, you know what, it's time for you to take a day off. Your kids are never going to be like, you know what, I think we should go to Grandma and Grandpa's house so you can have a break. They're never going to say that. You have to decide that. Life will eat you alive, right? It'll keep you on the treadmill like Carson forever. Unless you reach up and go, I'm done. So God says, listen, I'm not going to force this on you, but I'm going to invite you to it, and you are going to have to observe it, or shamar. You're going to have to decide this is going to be part of your rhythm. The battery will not jump off the drill and jump into the charger on its own. You have to decide to put it there. So this is why I say the first part is really rest for you. But it's not the end of the equation. It's for him. You're resting for him. And I know that sounds a little tricky and convoluted, but over and over again, you see God prescribe rest and the Sabbath as an act of worship for him, as a point of connection with him. In fact, when he put Adam and Eve in the garden, the word that gets used there is placed in our English language. What it really means in the original language is it's settled with. The idea is God settled with them in the garden. When you read that, before those knuckleheads went after that fruit on the tree, they had this really amazing relationship with God where they were walking through and he was walking with them. How it worked, I don't know. But it sounds way better than what we got going on. There was this settling into the presence of God and resting in that as part of the Sabbath. And then Jesus comes, and anytime there's a law, someone gets really serious about the law. So God says, here's 10 commandments, and we usually think that's the end of it, but it's really 600 plus commandments in the Jewish law. And so there's a group of people that come together and like, we've got to make sure everybody knows exactly what obedience or shamar, observance of these laws looks like. And so we're going to prescribe a bunch of things. And if we catch people not doing those things, we're going to slap them on the wrist and make sure that they did a bad thing and get them corrected. They call themselves the Pharisees. And so they have a very acute definition of the law and a very obtuse definition of what it means to observe that law. The problem with that is it's upside down from how God intended it. And Jesus comes along and did what Jesus did so regularly, ticks them off. I mean, nobody got upset with Jesus like the Pharisees. And most of the time it was around Jesus was not observing the law the way that the Pharisees thought he should be observing the law. I'll show you a time that this happened. Jesus was walking through some grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, so they began breaking off some heads of grain and eating them. But some Pharisees saw them do it and protested, "Look, your disciples are breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath." And you're like, you ticky-tack, Karen, religious people. That's exactly who they were, though. They literally thought, if you break off a piece of grain, that's work. In our day and age, it would be like, if you push the button on an elevator, that's work. If you go and walk your dog and it's pulling on you and you have to hold it back, that's work. You've broken the Sabbath. You're a terrible, terrible Christian. And I just imagine Jesus rolling his eyes when the Pharisees come along. But understand, they're just trying to be obedient. They're just trying to observe, heed, keep the rules. And Jesus says, but the rules, they're not for you to get back on a treadmill and get a bunch accomplished and check off the good God person list. Because that's just you hustling and being in haste all the more. And Jesus says, listen, the rule it's not for the rule in and of itself. It's too good to just be that. Remember, God doesn't expect things of us because he just likes bossing us around. He expects things of us and puts boundaries and barriers and fences in place in our life to protect us because he loves us and he wants better for us. And so Jesus would come along, and what we're going to see unfold here is that the law is not just for law's sake. It's not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end. And the ultimate end is with God, connection with God. And what's cool about this moment is Jesus is God, so the disciples are with God. It's here that we start to really see the difference between Martha and Mary, who we talked about last week. Martha was the kind of person that was either going 100 miles an hour or totally shut off because she was burnt out, right? She gets to the end of her rope. She goes, tells Jesus, make my sister help me. Whereas Mary had a very different understanding. Jesus didn't come here for me to do a bunch of stuff for him. He came here for me to be with him, to connect with him. And what Jesus is about to show the Pharisees and us is that the rule is not just to keep a rule. The rule is to make space for you to connect with me. This is what he says in response to the Pharisees. You would not have condemned my innocent disciples. This is problem number one. They had just declared the disciples guilty. Jesus turns around and says, they haven't broken any law. That doesn't sit well with them. He goes on to say, if you knew the meaning of this scripture, you want to talk scripture? Let's talk scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For the Son of Man is Lord, even over the Sabbath. This is Jesus saying, I'm the boss moment. I get to decide what this day is about because this day is about connecting with me. My disciples are connected with me, so I get to guide the day. And what I want most from my people and for my people is for them to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. You are so caught up in the ritual that you've lost sight of the right you in it all. And the right you is not a rule keeper that slaps others on the wrist when they break them. This is, for me, it's kind of like when it's my kid's birthday. And they wake up in the morning and they'll say, Dad, what are we doing today? And my response is always the same. Whatever you want to do. And those are the most restful, peaceful days of my week. Because I'm not the boss anymore. I don't have to make the decisions anymore. I don't have to think about what would be fun for them. They can think of that on their own. And so right here, Jesus goes, the Sabbath is my day. I'll set the pace. You relax. I'll set the destination, you come for the ride. I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. In some ways, what he's saying is, I am the Sabbath. I am rest. Again, what he's always going to point to is it's more important that we love than we keep the law perfectly. Because the whole point of the law is to help us love better. All of those 600 plus laws, by the way, can be divided in two. Some of them are about, this is how we love God best. Others of them are, this is how we love each other best. The 10 Commandments themselves can be divided that way. First 4, this is how you love God best. The last 6, this is how you love each other best. They're really all about love. So Jesus comes along and he says, don't get it twisted. Don't get it upside down. Don't make it about a rule. Do not turn the Sabbath into a ritual. Make sure it stays a connection. It's not just for you to rest, it's rest for you, for me. The whole point is me. So slow down. Because you're going so fast after accomplishment that you're missing the reason it's there in the first place. And I wonder how often that's true of just life for us. Where we're going so fast, we're missing the point. And we're so disconnected from God, our battery is just draining and draining and draining until we're left with nothing. And we could have just maybe done a little better job of charging regularly. I mean, listen to what Jesus said when he's calling us to follow him. He says, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. And I will give you rest. I will give you shalom. Take my yoke upon you. This is the idea, like 2 oxen with the bar up between them. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest, not just for your minds, not just for your hearts, but for your very souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. See, some of you are here today for the first time or the first time in a long time, and your concept of God is this driving, demanding, follow the rules, do these things, don't do these things, suck the joy in life out of life. But that's not what Jesus just said. And that's not the rhythm that God seemed to implement from the very beginning. It's not the example he gave us. There were patterns. Work a few days, take a rest. There were days where he went, plug in and recharge, reconnect with me, recalibrate your life around me. Because my yoke, the thing that I'm going to call you to do, it's not a burden. It'll change how you move through your life. So don't be going so fast that you get out ahead of me. Because I can't help you carry yours if you're so far ahead. And you're going to drop mine as you go. Take a Sabbath. I'm the Lord of it. So, by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean you are going to get 8 hours to watch Netflix. Because sometimes God's going to encourage you to do something in your day off that's not your ordinary work. Remember, that was what was in the rule, your ordinary work. There might be some extraordinary or extraordinary work that God might invite you to do because you're finally in a place where you're moving a little slower and it's a little quieter. That's why I say the Sabbath is rest for you, for Him. It's maybe and likely Him preparing you for whatever the next season is, the next day is, the next week is. I think God regularly invites us to move through life with a sense of rhythm. This idea that there's time where we go, there's time where we rest. There's time where we move, there's time where we stop. There's time where we're loud, there's time where we're quiet. It's not unlike music itself. I grew up playing music on a fairly regular basis, and in case you've never done that, there's notes in all the music, and this is a time where you're supposed to play a certain thing or sing a certain thing. But if you were to just hold that note the whole time, that would get really annoying for you and for the people listening. Music is not just constant noise. There's noise with breaks. There's a note, a rest, a note, a rest. And sometimes there's a whole rest where you're resting for several beats. But that's part of what makes the music great. It's what gets you tapping your foot. It's what gets you bobbing along. It's what makes you feel something in your chest when you're listening to really great music. Breaks are part of it. They're not the end of it. Sabbath is part of our rhythm. It's part of our life. It's not the end. We can't wait till later. It's in there. And sometimes what makes one note hit really hard is the rest that came right before it. So this is what it might look like in your week. You might put it on your calendar where you go, I am literally going to rest for 2 hours on Saturday. I know you probably can't do a whole day at this point. But literally put it on your calendar. And I get teased a lot about this, but I don't care. I put it right in my calendar so that when someone asks me to do something, I can look and say rest and go, I'm sorry, I have a commitment on my calendar already. And I don't feel bad about that. Because it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. I could literally throw the Bible at him and say, God told me to, so you can take it up with him. You might actually take it and put it on your calendar. Or set an alarm. And if you just don't have any time, here's how simple it can be. one song. One song where you put headphones on, you shut the world out, and you listen for 3.5 minutes. When it's over, you can get busy again, but you give yourself that moment with Jesus. And watch how that reorients things, and watch how that recharges things. Just those 3 moments. I know you're sitting there and you're like, that sounds good. I'll try and get to that on Wednesday. Then Wednesday will come and you'll be like, maybe next week. And then eventually you're going to be like, maybe when I'm dead, I'll take a break. So instead of leaving it up to you, we're going to give you that time today. The band's going to come out. They can come out now. We did this on purpose where we loaded most of the music into the end so that you could have about 12 minutes of Sabbath rest before you leave. And here's how this can look. If you want to sing, you can sing with all your heart. If you want to just sit and let it kind of wash over you and breathe, please do that. You can stand if you want. You can stay seated the whole time. If you want to kneel at some point, you can kneel. This is time for you to recharge and connect with the one who made you. And use the rhythm to reinforce into your soul the rhythm of life. And in that, I hope you'll find peace. Let's pray. God, thanks for being someone that doesn't just prescribe things, but you did those things in front of us. You took an entire moment in creation to rest. And Jesus, you did. You took naps, and you went away on your own. And you reminded us that our connection with you is what keeps us going. And that you're the boss of that day. So we can just follow your lead, whatever that looks like. So for the next few minutes, will you help us to take a few deep breaths? Will you remind us of who you are and who we are in light of it? Will you help us to have a sense of shalom, where we feel complete and we feel whole because we have you?